Welcome, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. You know who I am. I know who you are. I got my Yoda stick right here. Today we're going to be talking about the fall of Rome. Our question that you're going to have to answer next week in an essay is what were the primary reasons? What were the primary reasons for the fall of Rome? Now, you're going to get those in, of course, I mean, you should remember how we did this. We've done these document-based questions, DBQs, before. I'm sure you remember how we would spend some time doing each document. We would go through the documents, and then at the end of all the documents, you would have a question at the end that would ask pretty much how does this document help answer whatever the primary question is. Again, the primary question is, what are the primary reasons for the fall of Rome? So let's go into this. This is the background. This is the background document. The background document is going to give you the information, just like a background document should, that leads you up into it. I am going to spare us right now from me having to read it to you. I'm going to attach an audio file today or tomorrow that will help you to allow you to read it. I plan on doing that for all the documents as well, so that you'll be able to listen to it offline or in some format other than having to watch me. Okay? All right. You're awesome. You see how awesome you are? So far right now, you have already picked up so much information just by completing this document. The questions are pretty straightforward. I'm not going to go through them. You can read them, but questions like what was the Pax Romana? That's Latin. The Roman peace that is discussed, and in what way did the form of Roman government change around the time of Julius Caesar? Now, you need to be able to answer that question. If you haven't answered that question, or you can't answer that question, then we have a bigger problem than doing this document. Because that's something that we've covered a lot. A real lot. Like a lot. Next question. Beginning in the 3rd century, Roman was developing a soft belly. What does that mean? Again, that's explained in the reading. And then, of course, you have some vocabulary to complete. I want to make it clear that the answers to all these questions, just like in your document-based questions, are all within the reading. That could also mean in the notes at the top or at the bottom, and we'll see that when we talk later. So let's go on to document A. This is expected to be completed. Let's make that clear. Document A, which is, by the way, these are all out. You can look at these and do them at your pace. Get them done at your pace. So but they need to be due by the due date. It may say your pace, but I still expect them due on the due dates. All right, so that's pretty hard to read. Mr. B, I can't see that. We've had this discussion before. You go here, you go to view, you click zoom. Boom, you're really close. You're really close. Document A is a good example of pretty much straightforward. You look at this graph, and if you were to count the number of people, these are all the emperors. First of all, what is this graph, Mr. B? This is a list of the emperors. This is the years that they reigned, and this, of course, is the cause of death. Now, the one thing to remember about the Roman Empire is it did have a lot of stability, but it was also a lot of instability. Marcus Aurelius, we'll talk about him for a moment. Marcus Aurelius was emperor for 20 years of the Roman Empire. But there was only about 2 years of that entire time. Maybe it was 25 years that he was. You can look it up and tell me. 25 years that he was a emperor, but only 2 years that he didn't have a war going on. Defending the borders of Rome, fighting some battle somewhere. Only 2 years in his entire reign. He really didn't spend a lot of time in the actual city of Rome. He spent it going around the entire countryside of Rome. Because in order to be emperor, it's not an easy job. And a lot of people think leadership itself is an easy thing. It's not. Leadership is a very difficult process. And it takes a certain kind of individual who can lead and pull everybody else along with them. Leading is from the front, not from behind. Leading is getting other people to do what you want. And a lot of these emperors stunk at it. A lot of the emperors that we have is the big problem with hereditary or even this type of top at the very top leadership, where you only have one person at the top or a very few group of people at the top. If the people at the top stink or bad or just corrupt, dirty, lousy, you're going to have a bad system underneath it. If it's at the top, it stinks, that's bad. If it's at the top, it's great, it's good. That's a part of any system, but when it comes to the emperor, there's nobody to challenge the emperor. No matter what your feelings are on our country, and I'm sure that you can tell me that we only have a few years for people to hold leadership position. There's for the president, it's only 8 years. Congress is a different matter. Judiciary is a different matter, but many governors of the states are 2 terms, and that's it. Presidents, 2 terms, that's it. So eventually they change out. These guys are here for life. Emperors are there to the day they died. And you'll note one of the many things that you'll see is there's a lot of assassinations. A lot of assassinations that could have been avoided if they had good leadership or didn't have something happening on. Each of these assassinations tells a story. And if you'll note, many of these assassinations are, while they've only been in battle, been in power for a short time, some less than a year, less than a few months. That poor leadership, this almost 50 years of time frame of bad leadership, of leadership that's not reliable, of leadership that's people being replaced all the time, people that are being assassinated, that sends a bad message throughout the entire empire. It makes people feel unsafe. It makes people feel troubled. And so consequently, when that happens, the leadership is saying to the people, we are bad and we can't govern. And that makes people unhappy. So, you can look at that as one of the reasons. By the way, I think I just gave you the answer to this one down here. How does this document help explain the decline of the Roman Empire? You should be able to figure that out from the information that you have here. By the way, I did get a little ahead of myself. I did want to talk about your couple of do-nows that you had. First of all, the one from Monday was the question of who are the 2 Cornelias that were mentioned in my video. One of them was Caesar's wife. Cornelia was the mother of Julia, his most, the woman he loved the most in the world, his daughter Julia. She died in childbirth years later, but this was one of the only women that he truly cared about was Julia, his daughter, and her mother was Cornelia. So that was one reference to Cornelia. The second reference of Cornelia was the Grackguy's mom, and she had that famous story. If you should remember, because you've watched the video, you should remember. I explained how her friend wanted to see, hey, can you tell me what your family jewels are? And eventually Cornelia she brought her friend into the bedroom of her 3 children. And that was the most prized possession of the entire family, was these 3 children. Those were as a parent, I can recognize that and I can empathize with that. But you should see that as also she's the perfect Roman woman, in the sense that she was a great mother. She was a great example of what it was to be a Roman woman because of her dedication. And she was also the daughter to Scipio Africanus, the guy who defeated Hannibal and won the Second Punic War. So that was the answer to that one. And the other do-now from Tuesday was, how did I reference the Roman legionaries? Somebody out there referenced me, Mr. B, and said, I did say that they were engineers, junior level engineers, that were so capable that they were junior level engineers. So I apologize for not starting off with that. This is part A, document 1. You should be able to, you should have familiarized yourself with that. Let's go on to document B, number 2. All right, this, by the way, is one of those examples of you got to look at the notes. The answers are here. Source. What kind of source is this? First of all, before we do that, I should have done that with document A. Mr. B, bad. All right, this is a source chart completed from various sources. We'll give it a secondary source rating. Primary source, you should be something from it, like a first-hand account. Declaration of Independence is a primary source. The notes from Madison, I mean, you may not know this, but the Constitution, the notes on the U.S. Constitution written by James Madison are primary source notes. They're his notes. He was there. He observed. He witnessed. He's the witness of history. He wrote about it. That's a primary source note. Secondary source is, okay, I have read about the Battle of Alesia, and I am now writing about it. That's a secondary source. So I wasn't there, but I am writing about it. So what I'm writing about is then becomes a second source. My document becomes a second source. So this is a secondary source, and we'll go here to this one, an excerpt from the book concerning military matters by the Roman historian Vegetus, 450 CE. Remember, CE stands for Common Era. That would be the equivalent to AD. Excuse me a moment. I'm talking a lot, and I need my diet green tea. All right. Some things change, but the diet green tea sticks with me. All right. This is a primary source because it's from the actual time. He's writing during the time period that Rome existed, that the Roman Empire existed. So this is information that's his observations. He is a primary source. Vegetus is a primary source. So let's read along with the Yoda stick if you want. I'm going to read this. Before the year 400, Common Era, foot soldiers wore breastplates and helmets, but when, because of negligence and laziness, parade ground drills were abandoned, the customary armor began to seem heavy, since the soldiers rarely ever wore it. Therefore, they first asked the emperor to set aside the breastplates, and then the helmets. So our soldiers fought the Goths without any protection for chest and head, and were often beaten by archers. Although there were many disasters which led to the loss of great cities, no one tried to restore the breastplates and helmets to the infantry. Thus, it happens that troops in battle, exposed to wounds because they have no armor. Think about running and not about fighting. Great reason. So we're talking about the same question that we had before, which is down here answering this question. What is the it's there. What is the primary connection between this and the fall of the Roman Empire? So we're asking that question. Obviously, it has something to do with the lack of wearing armor, helmets, and breastplates. Breastplates are the pieces that go over your chest. They protect you, so if somebody tries to hit you with a sword, you're protected, or an arrow, you're protected. But it's heavy. It requires a lot of drill and a lot of training to have this, to be able to carry this. A lot of marching. Many of the soldiers of the Roman Empire at this time were garrison troops. In other words, they didn't march far, and so consequently they didn't build up the muscle and the strength of soldiers or legionaries who march a lot. It takes a lot of effort to walk carrying weight. Many of you know that because you carry backpacks. So that's that would be one of the reasons, by the way. Make sure you get that. Down here, The source, Michael Grant, The Fall of the Roman Empire, a reappraisal. Crown Publishing, 1982. If you haven't figured it out, that is a secondary source. So stick with me on this. I'm going to read it real quick. There can be little doubt that the weaknesses of the late Roman army were largely due to the eventual failure to enforce regular conscription. Now that's a vocabulary word. Conscription, you should know, is when they draft people, force people into the military. They force them to serve in some capacity, usually as a frontline soldier, and a lot of people don't like that because they don't want to have to fight and possibly die. To enforce regular conscription, they exempted categories were numerous. In other words, the people who didn't have to fight. In other words, oh, we don't want this group of people, these wealthy landowners, they shouldn't have to serve because they got to manage all that land. We need them to feed our troops, so they're exempted. Exempted means they don't have to serve. The exempted categories were numerous. Host of senators, this is the issue. Senators, bureaucrats, clergymen were entitled to avoid the draft. And among other groups who escaped were cooks, bakers, and slaves. So, with the exception of the last group, the other ones were all people who could have served but chose not to, got out of it, and used their influence and power to make sure that they didn't have to serve. Now, I want to step back to when we had the Republic. When we talked about the Republic, remember Caesar was this guy who was, I'm going to reform the people, the wealthy aristocrats are the ones who are still, running the land, and we should let the poor people of Rome get their plot of land and become farmers and grow stuff, and they don't have to worry about having to, live off the government. They can then live on their own and take care of their families. That's what Caesar was fighting for as a reformer. And, those of you who had it in your paper, good job. Those of you who didn't, points are going to be declining for you. But my point is this. He was trying to stop this because there was a great inequality between who had power, who had wealth, and who didn't have power and who didn't have wealth. There's a giant gap between them in the ancient Roman world. And that gap wasn't as important as the abuses that were allowed for the people up here at the top and the punishments for the people down here. The people down here were just the ordinary average Roman citizen. They had to suffer through all the bad stuff, and the people who were wealthy were able to avoid it. Now, they may have gone from a republic to an empire, but the basic problem where slavery was such a predominant part of it, and the large inequality that I just mentioned, that didn't go away. It was still there. And because it was never properly dealt with, because they got rid of a Caesar, Julius Caesar, maybe I'm just a little partial to it, I know, stunning resemblance, but the idea here is this happened, fall of Rome happened because those inequalities were never addressed, because no one ever dealt with them. They just grew worse and worse, and they maybe put a Band-Aid here, fixed a little bit, maybe did a little bit more at some point, but ultimately they continued to not fix it. So, that's pretty much it for me to discuss this. Make sure you're doing this. I'm going to leave you with this note. The essay for this is due just before break, which is not this week, but next week. I'm expecting you to have this due Monday, and I'm expecting the other ones that I listed that are due on Tuesday of next week. That should be plenty of time. Make sure these are your answers. Make sure that you're not sharing them with your friends. If you do that, that's silly. You're the one who's going to have to take the test on it, not them. Oh, I did say a test, right? You're also the one who's going to have to write the essay, not them. So how are you going to know what the answers are? You think I'm going to give you the answers? Probably not. Because there's stuff that I'm not mentioning. There's stuff that I didn't highlight in this. And I'm going to give you one example. That these up here, where is it? There it is. I didn't talk about how the decline, how actually Rome fell. I didn't talk about that. But the information's right up there. So you missed it. You probably missed it. Maybe you didn't. But I mentioned how they lost, how Rome fell. All right, you take care of yourselves. I will talk to you hopefully tomorrow with some more information. And make sure that you are doing your do nows and check-ins, and you're also completing the work. They're individually, so you can turn them in individually. Okay? Thank you. Take care. Make sure you wash your hands, and may the force be with you.